Okay, and we're there. Wow, that's what happens when we don't have the countdown by another. I'm not ready. Hold on. See, guys. Welcome to the Nutmeg Tavern. It's 4 o'clock on Friday, and we are here. We weren't sure whether it was going to happen today, but it happened. We made sure it happened. I am your host, John Townsend, and we're talking wonderful, fun history stuff and questions, and you're going to ask things and I won't be able to answer them, but it's going to be fun anyway. Normally I'm joined behind the bar by Ryan, but today Ryan is on the console.
Hey guys. Right,
because Aaron is out for this week. He'll probably be out next week too. Kyle is in the question seat.
Hello.
So there's Kyle, there's Ryan. Perfect. We've got it figured out. Have had a just intense week. I've been juggling like 3 different projects all at once. Mostly Ryan I've had him just slaving away, working on the catalog, hard at work on the catalog, and it's looking super good. Really excited about how the catalog's looking. What do you think, Ryan? You want to say anything about the catalog?
Man, it's a lot of fun. I like the work, but it's that like mind exhaustion at the end of every day.
Yeah. Because you're trying. It's like playing Tetris, but with words and pictures and everything else all at the same time. It's not like you only have 6 images to work with. You got to put them all together. So a lot of fun there. And we're working on a construction project here, and we're working on lots of new products and I've got to work on new videos coming up. So excited to see how the steak video did with Michael Dragoo, and that did just stunningly well. Thank you, YouTube, and everyone who's watched it and shared it. Michael was just downstairs just a little bit ago, coming in to get a piece of clothing. So just super happy about how that worked out. So things are just really popping on the channel. We're really enjoying that. How about just 1 or 2 little questions if you've got something quick, and then I will talk a little bit about the topic for today.
All right, the first one says, how did people in straw bale houses stop the straw in the walls next to the fire pit from getting too hot and combusting?
Well, straw bale houses are mostly a early 20th century invention. So, there are a few historical style houses, possibly 19th century. I think there's one down south someplace that's slightly earlier. But most houses by that time weren't using fireplaces, and so they didn't really have to concern themselves with that. Straw bale, generally you would just have some other material between that fireplace opening. If I were going to put a fireplace in a straw bale house today, you would just have extra insulation before you get to the straw. But even then, the straw encased inside of a straw bale house doesn't have a lot of air getting to it, so it doesn't, even if it's at 200 degrees, it's really not doing anything. It's not going to hurt it at all. So generally not a big problem.
How was transportation handled in the 18th century in a logistics sense?
Wow. Can you guys interpret that question for me?
My guess is that how are they transporting goods from one place to another? That's what I would think. Logistics.
So, in that sort of, how do we move goods, especially if somebody's selling something? Let's say there's a great example. There's a wonderful set of documents, diaries, letters, not really a diary, but letters and records of a man in England in the 18th century who he had sort of like a general store, but one of the things he also did was with all the people in his area, they made stockings and he sold them to military contractors. So he would have 10,000 stockings made, and he'd have them shipped from his location to London, and then they would go to the military to be given to troops. And he even talks about that shipping. He had shipping issues. So they would have wagons that usually in those inland circumstances, they'd have wagons carrying the goods, and you would, you'd work with the local wagon company and you'd give them crates or bags of goods, and they'd have tags on them, and they would kind of get there. It wasn't sort of it was probably a lot like UPS, where they would have sort of the goods would go to a hub area, and then they might get distributed and go on to another area. Or you might fill up your wagon and have the guy, haul the stuff from one area to another. It took a long time, even with something like you're hauling a wagon load of goods. You've got oxen, you have horses pulling that wagon, and today we think, stuff is going to get there, in a day or two. We're used to, new shipping methods where we get stuff almost right away. It's taking 2 and 3 weeks, and he's trying to even get like the boxes and the bags back so he can repackage stuff and send it again. So it's really interesting how it seems more convoluted than what it is today, even though you would think it would be, sort of simple. There are a lot of wagoners in North America, in Great Britain, men that are the truckers of the day, right? They are just carrying goods from one place to another with their wagon and their whatever animals they're using to pull those wagons around with. And you'll find multiple references to those when you find different journals. Not generally the wagoners journaling about that, but people who deal with that in the short term. Sometimes you'll see memoirs of somebody who did that for a little while and then they did something else, because generally somebody who does that their entire life doesn't write a book about it. So, and then of course we have all that wonderful, so much shipping going on in over the oceans and waterways in the time period to move things from one place to another. There's a lot of great information about that. A lot of people writing about taking ship rides, and you get some sense of how goods were transported.
Got a couple of donations if
Sure.
I can jump in real quick. We got Aaron C. I forgot to check my calendar. Are we rude and calamitous or rude and cantankerous this week?
Yes.
I'm not sure yet. We'll find out.
Yeah.
And then Mexer Cruel says catalog work. Yes, mind-numbing. I'm working on a project to consolidate 2 huge corporate websites together with 600 pages of content. I'm feeling you guys. Here's to Townsends. That's a big project.
Yeah, that's a super large project. Whenever you're trying to, especially morphing websites and catalog worth of goods and how you put that together, that is very troublesome. And it seems like as soon as you get done with it, you figured out a better way to do it. So today I was thinking, sometimes we always have world events around us today where we think, boy, things are really bad, or either politically or, economically, whatever. And generally, when you're feeling like that, the thing to do is to pop into one of these 18th century journals and start reading. And all of a sudden, this particular book is full of, this has captivities, different captivity accounts. So,
oh, fun.
Yeah, it's joyful reading. This section, this main one that I've been spending a lot of time with, and it's a long journal entry. It's just a segment of a journal of Major John Smith. This was when he was captive from 1756 to 1757, and he is, I think he was naval, Great Britain, and he was taken captive by the French, and he is imprisoned in, is it Quebec or Montreal? Anyway, they took him back to French Canada and he was in captivity, and it's like it's bad. They don't get enough food. The food's not very good. It's rotten. A lot of people are getting scurvy. Then disease starts to go through the prison, and lots of people are getting sick, and they haul them off to the hospital, but no one can visit them. And then at one point when you think, well, can't get much worse than this. All these people are dying off. Then the prison burns down, and they are kind of ushered out into a courtyard, into an open area, and they have to live in tents. And it's wintertime, and it just goes from bad to worse to worse to worse. And whenever I read those, boy, you read those right before bed, and you kind of snuggle down in your blankets after reading that, and you're thinking, boy, I'm going to get up in the morning, and I'm going to eat as big a breakfast as I feel like, and I'll get up whenever I was like, I don't actually have to get up, Yes, I have to get up to go to work, but if I didn't, the world would not end. Boy, I'll tell you, if you're feeling down, this will probably make you even more down. So don't do that. Don't read a Captivity account. There's lots of accounts all through the 18th century. There's 17th century accounts of people getting taken captive by Native Americans. There's 18th century accounts of that. A lot of that going on in that sort of tension and war situation. And then things like during the Revolutionary War, there was the prison ship Jersey, and there's just an amazing account of the hardships that were endured by people who were prisoners of war in that prison hulk. Just terrible situations, very difficult. So let me tell you, the readings, there's just so many of these that you can read, and they're illuminating but heartbreaking at the same time.
Did we have any debtor prisons here in North America?
Yeah, there were definitely some debtor prison things going on all the way up into the early 19th century. If you want a little bit of that, there's the sort of modern interpretation, A Midwife's Tale, but then there's the original journal of Martha Ballard, and she's like 1780s all the way up into when she dies. She's still putting things into her diary, I think around 1812, or I guess it's a little after that. But her husband, who was the tax collector for the county, when the tax collector had to go around and collect taxes, and he was on the hook. He was on the hook for people who didn't pay the taxes. Okay, so yeah, it's like, okay, now how does that work? Maybe, if that was like that today, maybe not very many people would want to be tax collectors. So he was on the hook. Other people didn't pay their taxes. He had, at the end of his term, he owed like £1,000 or something, and so they threw him in jail. And it was that situation. It was a tax it was a debtor's prison kind of situation. And it was a really interesting kind of prison in that because he wasn't a criminal, during the day he could leave sometimes and leave to the, like a 6-block radius of the prison. So yeah, you can go out, you can come back in as long as you're back by,
the equivalent of white-collar prison.
Right, as long as you're back by 5, no problem. You just got to sleep here. You can't... so he could actually still earn a little bit of money. He could still do certain things. But even then, he was something like 65 years old at the time. So he really couldn't earn a lot of money at that time. So here she is. She's doing, she's at home, still doing midwife things and visiting her husband in prison. It just was, So yes, that's one of those examples right there out of the 19th century, and that's in Maine at the time. So yes.
Did prisoners make their journals, or did they smuggle them into prison?
Yeah, most of the circumstances, like this one. This guy's a major. No, he's in the Navy. What is he? I can't remember. Maybe he was on board ship. Trying to remember. I'll look it up. Hold on. I'll find it. I think it's Major John Smith. Anyway, he's an officer. Yes, Major John Smith. He's an officer. So they're usually afforded a little more stuff. And a lot of times in prison, you were able to bring money in or bring things into prison if you're a prisoner of war. sometimes those things would be taken from you, maybe rightfully or wrongfully they would be taken from you, but you had certain luxuries, and you could even buy things and have them bring them into you. So things like paper, and I think at one point he's given a gift of paper to write with. So he's just keeping that on loose leaf paper.
What's the name of that book, John?
This particular one, very interesting. It's called Colonial Captivities, Marches and Journeys. It does have more than just captivities in it. And this is a book that was collected, excerpts were collected in 1935. So this is just a reprint, hard copy. I don't know who printed this guy, but it's got some super stuff in it. I really like the marches and the journeys part. There's some really fun, scary pieces in this particular book. Did I talk about the woman who was the matron of a hospital last live stream or the one before? I think I was going to use this as a topic and I didn't. Wonderful section where this woman is, she's being part of the hospital, so she's like nurse person, and she goes along with the military, and you get to kind of get her whole story and how that circumstance was. So, really good book.
Can you explain what living on a prison ship might have been like?
Yeah, so prison ships were used a lot of times in the 18th century, in the Revolutionary War time period. Prison ships after the Revolutionary War, and when Great Britain couldn't send their convicts over to North America anymore because we wouldn't accept them, they didn't know exactly what to do with them for a while until they came up with sending them all the way to Australia. So they tried prison ships for a while in the late 18th century, early 19th century. They were the worst of the worst in kind of prison situations. They were hard to escape from. You had water after that. You can kind of see people escaping when they're swimming and all that good stuff. They were very, very a disease-ridden thing, because people are just sort of kept in these, like, imagine the wettest, decaying building ever that you can't get out of. That's your prison area. And I think a few people did escape from the Jersey. I'm not sure about that one. It's been quite a while since I've read that particular account. But they were just horrendous places, but they were sort of easy to, you already had a hulk ship, wasn't good enough anymore to sail on the ocean. They'd take the masts out of them and keep them, just sort of stationary, anchor them so they'd stay in one spot all the time. They probably still needed pumped out. So, you would have prisoners pumping this thing so it continued to float.
Oh, geez.
So, yeah, it just doesn't get any worse. And, ships are known for having all these rats on board anyway. So you've got a rat problem, you've got water problems, it's bad.
So I got a couple more donations here. Somebody asked, do you have any clothing tutorials, or have you considered dressmaking or any other kind of clothing from the 18th century videos? And then Sue O'Connor said, life is very good after these accounts. My personal approach is before bed I take inventory of my day. If it's real bad, I remind myself I'm still here to complain about it. Could be worse.
Yeah.
That's what I've got right now. Thanks, guys.
Yes. Sorry, Sue, I didn't get you the topic beforehand. I wasn't sure what it was going to be. Seriously.
It's been one of those weeks.
Yeah, clothing tutorials has been a long time. So we've had some clothing kind of tutorial-y, sort of who's going to wear what videos. In the past, we need to do that more. So excellent suggestion, if not a topic, or I can't answer it with a yes because I should be able to answer it with a yes is a better answer to that. So I'll see what I can do.
Okay. Was that it?
Yes,
sir.
Yes.
All right. These questions are not on the topic, so
That's all right.
We'll just
That's
jump
fine.
into them. How common was cauliflower back then? Do you have any recipes or plan to show any with cauliflower?
Why would anybody eat cauliflower
Because
if they
it's
didn't have
yummy.
Hey, I like cauliflower.
Yes, it does show up in 18th century cookbooks. You see it in the British cookbooks. I think it's even mentioned, at least in the Amelia Simmons cookbook, the American Cookery from 1796. Sometimes it'll have things mentioned in the front half of the cookbook, which is sort of the marketing part of the cookbook. Hey, this is how you tell whether this meat is rotten or whether your watermelons are ripe or whatever, or talking about the different varieties. So the front half of that cookbook is good for that, and I think she mentions cauliflower, and you'll definitely find it mentioned in the English cookbooks of the time period, along with all those other classics like broccoli and all those fun things. Sometimes they're cooked in an interesting way. Sometimes it seems like they just overcook them until they turn out to be kind of wilty, but generally I think they actually did better with them than we think they did.
Somebody said pour cheese and bacon over
That's
the cauliflower.
right, exactly.
It tastes
How can you
better.
go wrong, right? It's like,
I
you
guess
just kind of
I've been
steam it a little
doing
bit.
it all
you
wrong. Yes. Sorry.
Pour cheese and bacon on.
Isn't that like a option for most things?
Yeah, probably.
Cheese and bacon. They ought to just whir it all up together.
When did cotton first start to become common with average people, and did it ever become more common than linen?
Well, obviously, it's more common today than linen, so yes. And the 18th century, late 18th century, early 19th century is a giant sea change in fabric and all the weaving technology, spinning technology. All those things are changing just massively in this sort of 50-year time period. And cotton goes from being a very expensive thing to the cheapest thing. They're much cheaper than linen. We were not able to mechanize linen the same way they were able to mechanize cotton. And so it just totally changed the industry, just massively, by things like, the cotton gin, and there's spinning jennies, and power looms come in, of course, later on. Although they tried to do power looms in the late 18th century, where they tried to mechanize that whole system. Of course, the first inventor of the power loom, he wasn't a weaver, so he just kind of is like, well, maybe I'll apply, and if you don't have the weaving down, then you shouldn't try to automate it. Anyway, so all of that is happening, hit and miss, trial and error there, but it's just a massive change right there in the late 18th century. And by the time you get to 1812, 1820, cotton's being a much, much cheaper fabric. And so linen might still be done in homes, because linen is still sort of a cottage industry. You can't mechanize it nearly as much. So, people in regular homes can kind of compete, because they definitely can't compete in cotton land when you have these giant factories turning it out.
Pat Putnam made a donation, and they said, when are you releasing the new catalog? My wife loves them. If you had a subscription for them, I'd be an owner.
Ah, yes. People who order things from the business get a catalog automatically, and you can order them on the website. There's even a place where you can sign up free to get one, right? So you'll get one bulk mail. Though the new catalog, what was our mailing date? Somewhere around April 10?
Yeah, I think it's the first week of April.
Yeah, somewhere around. It'll become available. It'll start to go into the mail stream somewhere around the first week of April, something like that. That's generally when it happens. For the past 20 years, we've done it like that. I can always remember sometime way back in history we used to do it. But anyway, So yes, springtime, generally mid-April is when they're available.
How were pots and pans made in the 18th century?
That's a hard question.
Yeah, it is a hard question. There are a lot of different kinds of pots and pans that are being made. 17th century pans and kettles are being cast in brass. That goes out of fashion in the early 18th century, and they start making them sometimes in cast iron. The kettles, the sort of saucepan-y things, those don't come in until a little bit later as cast iron into the 19th century. So in that 18th century time period, the person who works, the brazier who does copper and brass works, he cuts things, rivets them together, solders them together, then sometimes coats the interior with tin. So he's making pots and pans out of brass and copper. There's also tin items that are being made, sometimes maybe even, sort of iron, like sheet iron being worked into things like frying pans and other items. So those are being worked generally by individual craftsmen, blacksmiths in the case of iron, and people who work brass and copper. Some pots and pans are being made out of ceramic materials in the time period, especially 17th century. You see ceramic frying pans and little cooking pots, and we even have the pipkin. That's a pottery little cook saucepan. So a lot of different kinds of materials and all these different craftsmen who make them.
This one says, hello all. I got my powder horn from you guys yesterday, and it got me thinking about keeping powder dry on the frontier. Is it true that they sent powder to hunters in lead casks they melted into shot?
I've definitely heard about that, and I think that's what they do for Lewis and Clark, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think that's nearly as common, say, earlier. I think generally powder is sent out in barrels, and you just tried to keep it dry. Of course, if you make water barrels to hold water in, well then hopefully you can make barrels to hold water out too. But I haven't seen what powder casks, how thick they are and how sort of watertight. There's a different classes of barrels made now and definitely in the time period. Some of them were thin and just sort of like, how do I put a bunch of wood sticks around this thing to hold it together? They didn't really need to be, all that waterproof or anything like that. And then other barrels that are very, very tight that have to be able to hold liquid materials. So, sometimes even though something says it's in a keg, doesn't mean that it's, it's just a round crate, really.
Mandatory carry hopped in.
Yeah.
You know what? There we go. Sorry. Mandatory carry came in, and with the donations says to keep the effort going. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Back to you, Kyle.
How common were British and or European cookbooks in North American colonies? Would they have been used by more upper or middle class folks, or would everyone have use of them?
Probably upper and middle is a really good suggestion for that. I think generally people didn't have a lot of books at all. And a cookbook is even kind of a special side book, isn't it? Although cookbooks are very popular with us, in this day and age, there are hundreds and thousands of cookbooks being printed every year. In the time period, not nearly as much, and I think most people relied on sort of passed down cooking and whatever, it's like, well, I might, in certain households, they might send their daughters out to learn cooking at a different house where they have somebody who's a really good cook. So cookbooks per se, while they certainly were there, and some were printed in North America in the 18th century, it's like early on, before 1797 or 1796, they were reprints of cookbooks from Great Britain that were being printed here in North America. And then Of course, the first one that's sort of authored here in North America was 1796. So there are cookbooks being done. I bet you, though, that they're not all that common, especially in any household that isn't in that middle upper class category.
What was the most expensive item a common person would carry on them in their daily lives?
A common person is a real good question. So what is a common person? Most expensive item that you might have, let's just pick anybody, other than the obvious thing like jewelry that may be super expensive for a rich person. A pocket watch is the classic expensive item that they would have on them. And a pocket watch is a lot like the iPhone of the 18th century. There are even circumstances where people wanted to show off and they'd have more than one pocket watch, which seems a little silly. And then the other items that are expensive that people might have would be shoe buckles. If they are a man, they would have knee breeches buckles many times. They might have expensive buttons on their outfit. And sometimes those things were the things that if they might get stolen from them. So you'll see newspaper accounts of people that talk about, my watch was stolen or my buckles were stolen. Somebody knocked me down and stole my buckles. It happens. It happens. So
it seems like they would just take the shoe.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe they
take the time to
they probably
unbuckle it.
Undo the buckle and then throw the shoe back at you and run off.
Both are not easy to get off.
No, and sometimes and you might pawn those items too. That would be something. And so if you want to see someone who's down and out, in a picture, their shoes are flopping around. They don't have shoe buckles on them. They might be tied instead of have buckles on them because they're that kind of lowly a person. They might not have all the buttons on their outfit, or maybe none of the buttons on the outfit because they were stripped off of them or whatever. So those are the sorts of things that are probably, like what you're talking about, the most expensive items on you.
Speaking of watches and pocket watches, how were clocks and watches made in North America?
Clocks and watches. I don't know about North America per se. I mean, there are sort of clock makers, and those are that craftsman is working with a lot of sheet brass and cutting out the gears, using special tools to cut all those teeth so they're just in the right places. And there's a whole industry that goes around, and a whole giant set of tools that goes around making clocks. And watches, especially in Great Britain, that's one of those distributed industries that we don't kind of think about. In the 18th century, it wasn't all just items being made by a single craftsman, but there were some products, especially like a pocket watch, where the different items of a watch were farmed out to different people. And some people might just make the faceplate or just do the enameling on the face of a watch. There might be people who just craft the hands. And there was even an industry where the people made the little tiny chain. Imagine a bicycle chain that had 40, 50 links and it's only about that long. Tiny little chain that was inside of these fusee watches. They had this little chain that used you'd wind up the watch, and that was the way it transferred the energy to the inside of it. So making this itsy bitsy little tiny chain by hand, it was one of those industries that people would do. Some of those items were I'll make the whole thing, and other ones, all these little parts are sort of farmed out. And of course in that circumstance, you have to have interchangeable parts. So the idea of interchangeable parts isn't necessarily a completely, hey, this guy invented interchangeable parts, but some of that's happening in the 18th century anyway.
Here's a question that kind of goes along with the topic of today. What foods were given to prisoners, and did they receive small beer?
They might receive small beer. Obviously all the different circumstances are different. This particular, he talks about getting biscuit. which is, like ship's biscuit, the hard biscuits. So I don't have one here anymore. Sometimes I've got some lying around, chew on them. So that's a typical thing that's given to them. They had a lot of salt provisions, and a lot of people thought at the time that salt provisions themselves were what caused scurvy. Not, of course, they didn't have vitamin C, which of course was a problem, but they got salt provisions. They complained about that. Oh, these people are getting scurvy because of that. They would get sometimes fresh butchered meat that was supplied, and it was a lot like a very typical military situation, but these tended to be, a military ration might be something like you'll get a pound, like for a sailor, you'll get a pound of ship's biscuits, you'll get a pound of salt pork or salt beef, maybe it's a little less than that. You might get this, a beer provision, something to drink. But generally prisoners of war are always on something like half provision. They don't have to do any work, right? They're just sitting around, so they don't need as much to eat, at least in theory. So they had a lot of the very similar kinds of provisions that a typical soldier would have, but generally they got the worst of the worst, obviously. And I mean, in this circumstance, he is really kind of guessing that they're treating them poorly, trying to make them die off so that they don't have to take care of them anymore. So you can kind of get hints out of this particular one about those sorts of things. And provisions are one of the things, obviously, they're always complaining about.
Here's a question that I liked. Were there any women's prisons in the time period? And if not, what was happening with women prisoners?
In this circumstance, with Major John Smith in Canada, this prison had women and children along with the men.
Children.
Yeah. Although a lot of times the children are farmed out to families and they would never see them again. So they're just kind of like, oh, off they go.
All right, I've got another donation here from the Trek Wars. Hey guys, I love the live streams and the new playlist. It means I can watch episodes I have missed before.
Yeah.
It's great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you for your donation and kind comment.
Yeah, the playlists are there, and boy, if you have insomnia, you're trying to get to sleep, probably the live streams are the way to go. We should probably sell a subscription just for that.
I already hear your voice when I try to sleep anyways, and it's not soothing any longer.
What?
Oh.
Now it grates on you. Well, so we have a lot of people that help support us here on the channel so many different ways. One of the ways people support us is Super Chat. Another way is Patreon. So some people sign up to pay like $2, $5 a month, whatever. You get to choose on Patreon. And I try to get to the new Patreon people every week. I almost forgot. I had to run downstairs, get the names, come back upstairs. Patrick Zeller. Here's Old Grumpy Gamer Guy. Zachary Howell. Bester. Gamalier Hernandez Perez. Michelle Johnston. Mark Etrich, I think. Sometimes I can't read my own writing. And Mario Romani. Thank you guys. Those are the new Patreon people this week.
Awesome. Thanks,
we have over 600 people supporting us that way. It is incredibly helpful. It's that kind of like, okay, I always know that this is coming in, so I can budget to make this kind of video. Because sometimes, sometimes I got a crazy idea for a video. It's like, okay, we can't do that. That's too expensive. You're crazy, John. And that kind of stuff helps us do even the crazy John videos.
Somebody just commented and said they like watching before bed. It's 9 o'clock in where they're at. I don't remember where they said they were.
You can watch live right before bed.
Right.
They're from the UK.
There
you go.
And Hidden Harvest Grow Lights just sent us a donation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
John, did they get news to the backwoods any faster than stuff, like goods? Did news travel faster than...
I think I think
goods.
maybe news does travel a little faster than goods out to. It's kind of weird how fast the news can travel, especially when you're news starved. Today, we are so, I don't know, bombarded by news that I think it feels like we're getting numbed by it. I know I feel numbed by the news. Like, more news? You know, how much news can any one person consume? We have so much news, and most of it we don't want to hear about anyway. But when you're news starved, it kind of, you hear a new piece of news and you're so excited that, you'll run 3 miles to go tell somebody else about it. So I think it moves a little faster than, your typical goods that are being hauled by this wagon that's being pulled by 4 oxen that are going about as slow as you could possibly, manage.
Timothy Kerncock just asked, do you have an eBay store?
Do we have an eBay store? I'm trying to think about how to answer that. No.
Do we have an official Townsends
No,
eBay
we don't
store?
have an official Townsends eBay store. We should, but it takes a lot. eBay is like this tricky monster thing that's hard to work. But we do have this wonderful e-commerce site. Go to townsends.us. You'll find all our fun stuff there, along with the merch items. And
Mike Kruk says that your nutmeg looks small and we need to buy more for the tavern.
just a little.
Man,
nutmeg.
we've got our supply underground.
Yeah, the bunker is always needs refilled.
And, yeah. I think somebody else asked about prison riots, which sparked my interest.
There is prison unrest that is going on in the 18th century, and I don't have any sort of, there's a lot of concern about that in the people that are taking care of the prisons, and how do we keep these people sort of, especially in a prisoner of war situation. I mean, they're soldiers, right? They're used to being rowdy and clamorous and all that kind of good stuff. But maybe that's why they don't give them enough food, so that they, they're all weak and everything. Can't think of any stories off the top of my head about prison riots, though. I'll try my best.
Somebody else is asking about tobacco. If you search the word tobacco, you'll find some videos.
Yes, we have done. We did one when we were at Mount Vernon, and we've done some Q&As on tobacco. So sure, such a massively important topic for the 18th century. Tobacco is kind of all disappeared, and they're working on disappearing it more. But in the 18th century, it's king. It is so important to commerce.
All right, Kyle, I'm done talking.
Finally. Was the game chess played in the 18th century? I'm sitting at our dining room table here in Michigan with my new tournament chess set. So the question just popped into my head.
Yeah, chess is popular. Maybe not as popular as we think about it as a very, very popular game today. If you look in artwork, you see other games being, kind of popping up in imagery a little bit more, like checkers, drafts. Nine Men's Morris, Fox and Geese, some games like that. But yeah, board games in general, they're certainly happening. They're especially, maybe a little more popular with the higher class people that have, because those kind of games, they need furniture. You need a set. Other games you can stick in your pocket. So cards are going to be more popular than that. And the other, dice sort of things. Boy, talk about stick them in your pocket. Dice and dice games, very, very popular. Those are, kind of lower, going lower down the socio-economic ladder there for popularity of games.
What type of template do you use to cut the brim of your hats with?
What do we use that for? Ryan? Ryan cuts more hats than I do.
We
use just sort of a follower, really.
It depends on the hat.
Yeah.
So for the top hats that always kind of have the specific brim length, we have a jig for that. But other than that, I think that...
They're just hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most of them have trimming around the edges, so it just depends on where the clamps were when the hat was stretched.
Yeah.
How were buttons for clothing and jackets made in the 18th century?
A lot of the buttons are, well, we produce thousands and thousands of pewter buttons, like the button that's on this. And these are shanked buttons that are cast in pewter. They've got a special little 3-part mold with a bottom plate that has the face of the button, and then 2 side plates that come in together that make the shank of the button. You pour the pewter down that, just sort of like a bullet mold if you've seen one. I don't have a bullet mold here handy either, but a lot of buttons are made out of pewter. There are also things like bone buttons, horn buttons that are cut with sort of like woodworking tools. So different kinds of drill bits that would make round buttons, and you drill a couple of holes in them. They also would make sort of brass buttons out of flat stock and then solder the backs onto them. Wood buttons made like you would make the horn and the bone buttons. Sometimes you got really fancy buttons that are really just, they're jewelry. They're, whole made together pieces. They're just gorgeous.
Benji Zion just sent a donation and said, what was done in prisons if there was an epidemic? Happy weekend to everyone. Shalom.
Yes. In this particular account, there was the epidemic, and they set aside a special hospital area and put everybody that was sick in that. And if he never talks about anybody coming back cured from the hospital. They all go away, they don't come back. They must have, because by the time it's done, there were still some people left. But the care of people that are sick is in these circumstances is, we take them to the infirmary and, we try to take care of them, but I don't think there was much for medicine. He's really downplaying the doctor as he thinks he's, I don't know whether he's joking, he's being sarcastic, but he's like, yeah, the doctor can kill you off super fast if he gets to you. It's like he gave him medicine and 3 hours later the guy was dead, So, the infirmary situation was not good.
I've got another donation that just hopped in from Miles Stanley. I love the videos, guys. I'm eager to try out the different recipes you've gone over. It's always a joy to hear you discuss the history of these meals. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Kyle.
What's the most prized 18th century antique you've ever obtained?
What would I talk about more?
Man.
I don't know. I've recently picked up an 18th century pocket watch, but I want one that's actually like running. This one is like, it's really cool, but it's not. The 18th century pocket watches are delicate little things, especially after 250 years. So still looking for the good runner, and they're not easy to fix either. Most pocket watch people, it's like, no, I don't want to touch that. I don't want to fix that because they're little monsters to keep going. The pocket watch is probably one of the most interesting of the pieces.
I'm sure your dad has probably obtained a lot of things.
Well, there's a couple of pocket pistols. So imagine a little flintlock pistol that's like yay big and made to put in your muff or in your waistcoat pocket.
That's neat.
Those are really little works of art too.
Some neat glasses.
Yeah.
I like the glasses a lot. They're not mine, so. Your FBI agent sent us a donation.
Okay,
It says, just wanted to say thanks for introducing me to some of my new favorite foods. Love your channel.
Thank you so much. Glad you're enjoying it.
How was rope made?
Wow, can you imagine great big long, buildings, and you've got people that are taking this, hemp usually, and they're twisting it into cords, and those get twisted into much, much bigger ropes. They would make giant cables. Can you imagine a rope that's like, 18 inches in diameter, made of 7 other ropes all twisted together and all done by hand by a whole bunch of people? They had these rope walks, a really long, like low barn that was a rope walk where you'd have to have all this, rope all in the individual parts, and then you twist it all together. I don't know. There's some really, really fun pictures. Diderot's Encyclopedia has some rope work in it. If you've ever made rope, it's really fun where you twist all the things together and then they kind of automatically just bind up and turn into rope. It's a fun process and really fascinating to watch. And if you've ever seen just little rope made, you can imagine what happens when it's like, okay, how do I take this same process and I make, a giant rope? It is so incredible to look at the industry that they did and how they did it all by hand. They didn't have giant machines, or if they did, they were made out of wood. You can imagine, they had engines, they had steam engines in the 18th century, and it was like 100-foot tall with giant wooden beams doing things. It is fascinating to see how they did some of their industry. Rope making is fascinating. The John Painter book, where the man who was like the first sort of terrorist during the Revolutionary War, and he burns down the rope walk, I think in Plymouth, tries to catch the whole shipping industry on fire there in town, but he didn't manage to do it.
I've got another donation from Adam Gear, and it says, planning a trip for this fall. Can the public view the cabin?
The cabin is not in a public area, so it's not something that can be visited because it's not in that kind of a spot. The store is open. Our physical location here is open on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. But it's a little, and sometimes we give people like a warehouse tour, but that's not as really. This is the place to see it because I don't know what to say. Should I say anything else, Ryan?
No, it covers it.
Your dad chimed in and said that he has an 18th century French musket at home.
There you go.
How common was it to have gold in your pockets and a way of trading back then?
Gold is expensive. I mean, gold coins, gold guineas, they're in circulation, but they're huge. So, if you got a guinea in your pocket, depending on how you adjust for values, and it's very, very difficult to adjust understanding exactly how much money was worth, because there are multiple ways you can calculate it. But if you had a gold guinea, which is like a quarter, a little thinner, a little smaller, but it's like having a $500 or $1,000 bill in your pocket. So not many people are carrying around gold guineas in their pocket. And even then, you're very careful with it. Many people had a lot of different places where you would go, and if you used that kind of money for transactions, they would have scales right there to make sure that guinea was a whole guinea.
Did they trim those like the pieces of 8? Yeah.
Yeah. So that was they had the problem. The reason why coins of that time period had the milling, it's funny because the coins we have today have milling around the outside edge or something like that. And that was all to keep people from clipping that precious metal. Of course, ours don't have any precious metal, so you can clip it all day long and it's still a quarter. But in the time period, you'd shave off little pieces of a coin and then you collect enough of that and you made some good money.
All right, I've got another donation here. And then we're getting close, so maybe one more question after this,
okay.
Kyle.
Yep. Good.
Count Pasta Creep. That's the name.
Okay.
Says, ahoy there. As a U.S. sailor here, wondering if you will ever go over tales of heroes such as John Paul Jones. I always enjoy your cooking videos and think that these legends would make an excellent addition to your channel.
I tend to talk about the lives of the common people and people that we haven't heard of. Stories about, and fascinating, George Washington or, somebody like John Paul Jones or, all those people have fascinating stories, but those are stories that are being told and have been told, and you can find them in, history books. I hope. Okay. I hope. I like to find the stories that are people who we haven't heard of. Nicholas Cresswell and his journal. or somebody who's taken captive like this person, and the story that all these thousands of stories that have been told, we have not heard about them. We don't know the amazing things that have happened. Just normal people, like the Martha Ballard diary that I mentioned earlier. A fascinating life of a everyday person, because I'm an everyday person. I'm not a John Paul Jones. So I love those stories about just regular people.
I have another donation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Frisco Cat Shark. What other cultures around the 18th century beside American interest you?
I am interested in all those other cultures, especially about how they impacted and those similarities and differences. So, we have a bunch of different cultures that are coming into North America at the time that are influencing German, Dutch, French cultures that are coming in. The Spanish are, affecting a whole lot of that. Of course, we have African culture that's coming in, and the Native American culture, and all these things come together. And they, there's tensions and different things that are being picked up and carried along by our classic American culture, whatever that is, right? So all those things are fascinating to me, even sometimes where you get to see at least a glimpse of what's happening in other places, like, in China or whatever in the 18th century, and how incredibly different they are, and they're still affecting it. So, like porcelain is coming all the way from Asia, and it's coming into North America, and how does that change things? So,
all right,
totally
Kyle.
fascinating.
All right.
One more.
Here we go. How was lead for portacrans made?
There are a bunch of different things. So a portacrayon, these are a typical kind of pencil lead that they're supplied with. And graphite in the 18th century, I can't answer that about exactly what that was like. A lot of times these were used with different kinds of chalks, or something like if the crayon has got enough sensitivity to it, you would have something like charcoal in there too. So these are made so that you can open them up and put different kinds of content in them. You might even use just lead in there, the mineral or the metal lead, and that makes also a writing stylus. So there's a lot of different kinds of things, and that's the nice part about these little portacrayons, is because you can change it out, change it to wherever you need to. It's almost time to go home. We're going to blow out the lights here pretty soon. We got to usher everyone out of the Nutmeg Tavern. But before you go, I want to thank you for all the amazing things you do. We had some wonderful super chat folks. We have our wonderful people who support us on Patreon. A lot of times there's like links down in the description section for things like merch. Sometimes we have t-shirts or mugs or whatever. I think we still have a few t-shirts left, and there's all kinds of fun stuff there. So all those things help us continue to make wonderful, fun videos. I love making videos. You guys make it happen. Thank you for everything you do. Have a wonderful weekend.